The sterile, recycled air of the airport terminal felt like a final, suffocating insult. Liam stood before the security gate, a ghost in his own life. The fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous dirge, casting long, distorted shadows on the polished floor. Each hurried step, each cheerful announcement for a flight to somewhere full of promise, was a sharp splinter in the raw wound of his reality. He was not going somewhere new. He was being sent away, discarded. His wife, Clara, stood a few feet away, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her expression was a carefully constructed mask of detached impatience. There was no sadness in her eyes, no flicker of the love he once believed they shared. There was only a cold, hard finality, as if she were overseeing the disposal of unwanted furniture. Beside her, her mother, Eleanor, radiated a triumphant chill that cut through the atmosphere like a blade. Her posture was ramrod straight, her chin held high, a queen surveying the exile of a peasant from her pristine kingdom. She looked at Liam not with hatred, but with something far more cruel: indifference. He was an inconvenience that had finally been dealt with. Marcus, Clara's brother, leaned against a pillar, a smirk playing on his lips. He checked his expensive watch, a silent, arrogant gesture that screamed, "My time is valuable and you are wasting it." Of the three, his pleasure was the most overt, the most venomous. He had never hidden his contempt for Liam, the working-class immigrant who had dared to marry into their self-proclaimed dynasty. "Well, this is it," Clara said, her voice flat and empty. It was not a farewell, it was a statement of fact, a closing entry in a ledger. Liam's own suitcase, a cheap, battered thing, sat at his feet. It contained the sum total of his life in America, a few changes of clothes, some worn paperbacks, and a collection of shattered dreams. He had arrived 5 years ago with so much hope, a heart full of love for the woman who now looked straight through him. "I still don't understand why," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. It was a foolish question. He knew why. He had known for months, as the distance between them grew into a chasm, as her family's whispers grew into open disdain. Eleanor stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the tile. "Let me make it perfectly clear for you, Liam. You were a mistake. A temporary diversion for my daughter. She is destined for better things, for a man of substance, of a certain background. You simply do not fit." Her words were not angry. They were delivered with the calm, cutting precision of a surgeon. Each syllable was designed to dissect his worth, to lay bare his inadequacies. "We are a family of consequence," Marcus added, pushing himself off the pillar. "We can't have someone like you dragging down our name. It was a simple matter to have your visa status reviewed. Turns out your sponsorship was contingent." He winked, a gesture of pure, malicious glee. They had done this. They had actively worked to have him removed, to have him deported. The realization, which had been a dark suspicion, now solidified into a devastating certainty. The woman he loved, the family he had tried so hard to be a part of, had not just fallen out of love with him. They had orchestrated his exile. Clara finally looked at him then, a flicker of something, pity perhaps, or a sliver of guilt, crossing her face before it was quickly extinguished. "It's for the best, Liam. We were never going to work. We're from different worlds." "The world I brought you into," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He thought of his life savings, every penny he had earned from years of back-breaking work, poured into her dream of opening a high-end boutique. A boutique that was now thriving, a testament to his faith in her. Eleanor scoffed, a sound like tearing silk. "Oh, please, that paltry sum. Consider it a foolish investment. We have, of course, dissolved your name from the business. It was a clerical error. It was ever on there to begin with. The final humiliation was yet to come. Eleanor reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thin stack of $100 bills. She did not hand them to him. She held them out, pinched between her thumb and forefinger, as if they were contaminated. "Here," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "A severance package. So you can get a hot meal when you land wherever it is you came from. Do not try to contact Clara again. Do not try to contact any of us. This chapter is closed." She dropped the bills. They fluttered to the floor, landing around his worn shoes like fallen leaves. The gesture was so profoundly demeaning, so theatrical in its cruelty, that Liam felt the air leave his lungs. He was not a person to them. He was a problem to be paid off, a nuisance to be dismissed. He did not bend to pick up the money. He simply stared at it, then back up at them. He saw them for what they truly were, hollow, cruel people, draped in expensive clothes and self-importance. "Go on then," Marcus urged, gesturing toward the security line. "Your flight is boarding. Wouldn't want you to become an illegal alien on top of everything else." Liam's hand tightened around the one object he had taken from the house that held any meaning. It was a small, leather-bound journal, its cover soft and worn with age. It had been a gift from Clara's Uncle Arthur, a man the family had always spoken of with a mixture of embarrassment and disdain. Poor eccentric Uncle Arthur, they called him, the black sheep who lived in a small, cluttered cottage and had no interest in their social climbing. Arthur had given it to Liam on his wedding day, pressing it into his hand with a knowing look. "For the quiet moments," he had said, his voice a low rumble. "A man needs a place to keep his thoughts straight when the world gets loud." Arthur had passed away 6 months ago, and the family had given his memory little more than a perfunctory sigh of relief. Liam clutched the book now. It was a tangible link to the only member of that family who had ever shown him genuine kindness. Without another word, he turned his back on them. He left the money scattered on the floor. He walked toward the security gate, his shoulders squared, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He did not look back. He knew what he would see. 3 smug, satisfied faces, already turning away, already forgetting him. As he shuffled through the line, presenting his passport for the last time on American soil, he felt a profound sense of loss that went deeper than just a marriage or a home. He had lost his belief in the inherent goodness of people. He had given his whole heart, and in return they had ripped it out and stomped on it on a sterile airport floor. The journey back to his home country was a blur of sleepless hours and the drone of jet engines. Liam landed in a place that was once familiar but now felt alien. He was a stranger in his own past. He stayed with an old friend, sleeping on a lumpy couch, the weight of his failure pressing down on him day and night. For weeks he did nothing. He was adrift in a sea of grief and betrayal. The memory of Clara's cold eyes, of Eleanor's sneer, of the money on the floor played on a loop in his mind. He had been so naive, so willing to believe in a fairy tale. He had worked tirelessly, supporting Clara's ambition, thinking he was building a life for them both. He remembered the long nights he'd spent renovating the space for her boutique, his hands raw and calloused. He remembered maxing out his credit cards to buy her initial stock, the proud look on her face when they first opened the doors. He had believed he was her partner. In reality, he was just her seed money, a temporary resource to be exploited and then discarded when a better option came along. The family's cruelty had been a slow poison. At first, it was subtle. Jokes about his accent, backhanded compliments about how well he had adjusted, constant reminders of his humble origins, contrasted with their storied lineage. Eleanor would host lavish dinner parties and introduce him as Clara's charming little project. Marcus would grill him on financial news, trying to expose his lack of a formal business education, smirking when Liam couldn't keep up with the jargon. Clara had always laughed it off. "Oh, that's just Mama," she would say. "You know how she is." Or, "Marcus is just protective of me." But Liam saw how she basked in their approval, how she slowly began to adopt their attitudes, their casual condescension. She started correcting his grammar in public, critiquing his choice of clothes, suggesting he take etiquette classes to fit in better. He had tolerated it all for her. He loved her, and he believed love could conquer anything. What a fool he had been. Love did not conquer. It had been conquered, laid low by snobbery and greed. Their world was built on a fragile facade of superiority, a belief that wealth and bloodline made them inherently better. They weren't just snobs, they held a deep-seated conviction that people like Liam were fundamentally worthless, existing only to serve or be dismissed by their betters. One rainy afternoon, as he lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, his fingers found the worn leather of Uncle Arthur's journal in his jacket pocket. He had carried it with him constantly, a strange, subconscious anchor. With a sigh, he pulled it out. He had never written in it. He had never even opened it. He ran his thumb over the embossed, faded initials on the cover, A.S. Arthur, Sterling. He had been a quiet, thoughtful man with eyes that seemed to see right through the family's pretense. During family gatherings, while everyone else was engaged in loud, self-congratulatory chatter, Arthur would often sit with Liam, asking him about his life, his work, his dreams. He listened with a genuine interest that was entirely absent in the rest of the family. They had dismissed him as a failure, a man who had squandered his potential. Liam had seen him as a kindred spirit, another outsider in a den of vipers. He opened the book. The pages were not blank. They were filled with Arthur's neat, precise handwriting. But it wasn't a diary. It was filled with what looked like complex mathematical formulas, snippets of code, and cryptic phrases. The serpent eats its own tail in Geneva. Follow the labyrinth to the Minotaur's vault. Key P734 unlocks the first gate. Liam frowned, confused. It seemed like the ramblings of a brilliant but troubled mind. He was about to close it when a small lump on the inside of the back cover caught his attention. He pried at the leather lining and found a small, flat key taped securely underneath. It was an old-fashioned safe deposit box key, stamped with a long alphanumeric code. A spark of curiosity, the first real emotion he had felt besides despair in weeks, flickered within him. What was this? What had Arthur given him? He had no idea, but it was a mystery, a thread to pull on in the unraveling mess of his life. He spent the next few days poring over the journal. He used his friend's computer, staying up late into the night, typing the strange phrases into search engines. Most led nowhere. But then he started cross-referencing the codes with financial districts in major world cities. The phrase about Geneva, combined with a specific string of numbers, led him to the website of a highly exclusive, very discreet Swiss law firm, Davies and Associates. Meanwhile, back in the United States, the Beaumont family, for that was their proud name, was celebrating. With Liam gone, Clara was officially divorced. The paperwork rushed through with the help of their expensive lawyers. She was being courted by a man named Julian Croft, the heir to a hotel fortune, a suitor Eleanor had been cultivating for years. He was everything Liam was not, wealthy, well-connected, and, most importantly, from the right kind of family. The boutique, legally and solely in Clara's name now, was more successful than ever. She and Eleanor were planning to expand, to open a second location in a more prestigious neighborhood. Marcus had just closed a big deal at his investment firm, a deal that involved a series of risky, ethically questionable maneuvers that he boasted about openly at the dinner table. They were on top of the world, their future bright and shiny, scrubbed clean of the unfortunate stain of Liam. They spoke of Liam as if he were a ghost, a bad dream they had all woken from. They were utterly convinced of their victory, of their own invincibility. They had disposed of the problem, and they would never have to think of him again. Their arrogance was a fortress, its walls thick and impenetrable. They could not imagine a world where their actions could have consequences, especially not from a man they had so thoroughly broken and discarded. Liam, armed with a new, fragile sense of purpose, gathered what little money he had left. He sold the watch Clara had given him for their first anniversary. It was the last thing of value he owned. He bought a one-way ticket to Zurich, Switzerland. His friend thought he was crazy, chasing a wild goose chase based on a dead man's cryptic journal. "What if it's nothing, man?" his friend asked, driving him to the airport, a sad echo of his last traumatic trip. "Then it's nothing," Liam replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "But what if it's something? It's the only thing I have left." The flight to Zurich was different. This time, he was not being banished. He was moving towards something, an unknown future shaped by a dead man's secret. He arrived in the clean, orderly city and found a cheap hostel. The next morning, he put on his best, though slightly rumpled, clothes and walked to the address listed on the Davies & Associates website. It was not a towering glass skyscraper. It was a discreet, old stone building on a quiet, cobblestone street. The brass plaque by the door was polished to a high gleam. He took a deep breath and pushed the heavy oak door open. The interior was silent and intimidating. Dark wood paneling, plush carpets that swallowed the sound of his footsteps, and an air of immense, old-world gravity. A severe-looking receptionist looked up from her desk, her gaze sweeping over him, clearly unimpressed. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she doubted it very much. I have an appointment," Liam lied, his nerve almost failing him. "My name is Liam. I believe I'm here to see someone about the estate of Arthur Sterling." The name worked like a magic word. The receptionist's expression shifted instantly from dismissal to respectful efficiency. She picked up the phone, murmured his name and Arthur's, and then hung up. "Mr. Davies will see you now," she said, her voice a full octave lower. "Third floor, his personal office." Liam's heart pounded as he rode the small, wood-panelled elevator. He was ushered into a large corner office with a panoramic view of the city and Lake Zurich. An elderly man with sharp blue eyes and a perfectly tailored suit rose from behind a massive mahogany desk. He was tall and imposing, yet his smile was surprisingly warm. "Mr. Liam," he said, his English accented but flawless. "I am Alistair Davies. I have been waiting for you for quite some time. Please, sit." Liam sank into a leather chair that was softer than any bed he had ever slept in. He felt completely out of his depth. I don't know why I'm here," Liam began, fumbling in his pocket for the journal and the key. "I was married to Arthur Sterling's niece. He gave me this before he passed." He placed the items on the polished desk. Mr. Davies nodded slowly, his eyes twinkling. He did not look at the journal. He looked at Liam. "Arthur was my oldest and dearest client, and my friend. He spoke of you often in his final years. He admired your character, your integrity. He said you were a man of quiet strength, a stark contrast to the peacocks in his family." The lawyer leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "Liam, what I am about to tell you will be difficult to process. I advise you to listen carefully and try to remain calm." Liam nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. The Beaumont family, including your former wife, knew Arthur as an eccentric recluse with modest means, Mr. Davies began. This was a fiction Arthur carefully cultivated. He despised their obsession with wealth and status, and he took a certain pleasure in being dismissed by them. He paused, letting the words sink in. The truth, Liam, is that Arthur Sterling was one of the wealthiest men in the world. He was the founder, architect, and sole owner of a private global conglomerate known as Sterling Global Holdings. Liam stared, speechless. He felt a wave of dizziness. This had to be a joke, a cruel, elaborate prank. Sterling Global is not a public company, Davies continued, his voice calm and steady. It is a labyrinth of trusts, holding companies and private assets deliberately structured to be invisible to the outside world. Its portfolio includes interests in technology, real estate, pharmaceuticals, and international finance. Its current valuation is conservative. He slid a single, thick document across the desk. It was bound in dark blue leather. Liam looked at the cover sheet. His eyes scanned the text, but his brain couldn't seem to comprehend the numbers. He saw a dollar sign followed by a 3, another 3, and then a dizzying string of zeros. $33 billion, Mr. Davies said softly. That is a conservative estimate of the net worth of the assets held by the holding. Liam felt the room tilt. He gripped the arms of the chair to steady himself. This was impossible. Uncle Arthur? The man who wore frayed sweaters and drove a 20-year-old car? And the most important thing you need to understand, Liam, Davies said, his gaze intense, is that Arthur, having no children of his own, and a profound disappointment in his relatives, amended his final will and testament shortly before his death. He left the entirety of Sterling Global Holdings, every share, every asset, every last dollar, to you. The world went silent. The humming of the city outside faded away. Liam could hear nothing but the frantic, thunderous beating of his own heart. He was the owner of a $33 billion empire. Me, he finally managed to choke out. Why me? Because he saw in you what he valued most, Davies explained. Honesty, humility, a capacity for hard work. He saw how the Beaumonts treated you. He saw you pour your life into your wife's dream, only to be disdained for it. He considered it a test of your character, and you passed it in a way he found truly remarkable. Davies went on to explain the intricate mechanics of the inheritance. The will was ironclad, executed through multiple international jurisdictions to be unassailable. The key Liam possessed was for a vault downstairs containing the primary ownership certificates and bearer bonds. The journal was a guide to the empire's structure, a map for its new king. Liam's mind was reeling, a chaotic storm of shock, disbelief, and a slowly dawning, terrifying sense of power. He thought of the airport. He thought of the money on the floor. He thought of Clara's empty eyes. Then Mr. Davies delivered the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. There is one more thing, Liam. An irony that I believe Arthur, in his own way, would have found deeply satisfying. He opened a folder on his desk. Arthur was a generous man, even to those who did not deserve it. For years he anonymously supplemented his sister Eleanor's lifestyle. He couldn't bear to see her fail, despite his contempt for her values. He slid another document across the desk. It was a loan agreement. The Beaumont family mansion, Davies said, tapping the paper. The mortgage is not held by a traditional bank. It is held by a shell corporation, which is a subsidiary of another shell corporation, which is ultimately wholly owned by Sterling Global. He pushed another file forward. Your former wife's boutique, the sizable business loan that allowed her to expand and stock the high-end inventory. It came from a private equity firm. That firm is also owned by Sterling Global. Another file. Marcus Beaumont's seat at his investment firm, his entire book of business, financed by a line of credit from a lender, also owned by us. The full, staggering truth crashed down on Liam with the force of a tidal wave. The Beaumonts' entire life, their house, their cars, their businesses, their social standing, was a house of cards built on the foundation of the man they scorned. Their wealth was not their own. It was a loan from Uncle Arthur, a loan that was now owned and could be called in by him. Liam stared at the papers, his hands trembling. He had been mourning the loss of a life he thought he was building. But that life, and the people in it, had been a complete fabrication. Their superiority was a sham, their power an illusion. And now he held the strings. For a long moment he was frozen. The shock was a physical weight, pinning him to the chair. He saw Eleanor's smug face, heard Marcus's mocking laughter. He felt the cold humiliation of the airport all over again. The pain was still there, a sharp, burning ember. But now something else was stirring in the ashes, a cold, clear, and absolute resolve. He looked up from the documents, his eyes meeting Mr. Davies's across the vast mahogany desk. The shock had passed, replaced by a glacial calm. The victim was gone. The man who sat in this chair was someone else entirely. "What do we need to do?" Liam asked, his voice steady and low. "To take control." A slow smile spread across Alistair Davies's face. "First, you sign the transfer of ownership documents. That will officially make you the sole director of the board. After that, we can begin to make some administrative changes." Liam picked up the heavy, expensive pen Davies offered him. He thought of the few $100s lying on the airport floor. He thought of them driving away, leaving him behind without a second glance. He pressed the nib to the paper, and with a firm, deliberate stroke, he signed his name. The signature was not the shaky scrawl of a broken man. It was the confident mark of a king claiming his throne. The decision was made. There would be no angry phone calls, no dramatic confrontations. Not yet. This would not be a revenge born of hot-headed anger. It would be a cold, calculated and systematic dismantling. Justice served with the surgical precision of a surgeon. He spent the next week in Zurich, living in a suite at a hotel where a single night cost more than he used to make in a month. He and Davies held marathon strategy sessions. Liam, a quick study, absorbed decades of complex financial information, guided by the old lawyer who seemed to relish his role as a kingmaker. "The Beaumonts' greatest weakness is their arrogance," Davies explained, pointing to a complex flowchart of their financial dependencies. "They believe they are untouchable. They will not see this coming. They will assume any initial problems are bureaucratic errors beneath their notice." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. They would not attack the family directly. They would simply reclaim what was rightfully theirs. They would turn off the tap. "We will begin with the peripheral assets," Davies advised. "We recall the credit lines that finance their cars and club memberships. Small things, annoyances. It will plant the first seeds of unease. Next, they would target the businesses. We will issue a notice of default on the boutique's loan. The terms, which Arthur drafted himself, are incredibly strict. A single missed payment, which we will engineer by freezing their operating accounts, allows us to seize the entire business as collateral. Finally, the mansion. The mortgage will be called in. They will be given 30 days to repay the full amount. An impossible sum. When they fail, the property will revert to its legal owner, you." As for Marcus, his situation was more delicate and more damning. Arthur suspected for years that Marcus was engaged in fraudulent activities, Davies said, his expression grim. "Our internal auditors have been monitoring him. We have a complete file of evidence detailing embezzlement and insider trading. An anonymous tip to the SEC, along with this file, should be more than sufficient. Liam listened to it all, a quiet, focused intensity in his eyes. He felt no joy, no giddy sense of vengeance. He felt only a profound, grim satisfaction, the feeling of a great and terrible weight being balanced on the scales of justice. The first step was a simple phone call. Liam sat in Davies's office as the lawyer made the call to a subordinate in another city. "Initiate protocol labyrinth," Davies said, his voice crisp, "effective immediately." And with those 4 words, the first domino was pushed. The invisible, multi-billion-dollar machine of Sterling Global began to turn, its gears grinding slowly and inexorably toward the unsuspecting Beaumont family. Back in their sun-drenched mansion, Eleanor Beaumont was planning a garden party. She was on the phone with a caterer, arguing about the price of imported champagne when her personal assistant knocked on the door of her study. "Excuse me, Madame Beaumont," the assistant said, looking flustered. "There's a call from the dealership. They say there's an issue with the financing on your vehicle and Mr. Beaumont's. They said a tow truck is on the way." Eleanor frowned. "What nonsense! Tell them it's a mistake. I'll have my husband's office sort it out." She waved the assistant away and returned to her call, utterly unconcerned. An hour later, she watched in disbelief from her window as her silver Mercedes and her husband's black sedan were unceremoniously hooked up and towed out of their driveway. The first crack had appeared in their perfect world. That same afternoon, Marcus was in a celebratory lunch with his colleagues, boasting about his latest triumph. His corporate credit card was declined when he went to pay the bill. He laughed it off, paying with a personal card, annoyed at the inconvenience. When he returned to the office, his access card wouldn't work. He was met at the door by 2 stone-faced men from corporate security and the head of human resources. "Marcus," the HR director said, avoiding his eyes, "there's been a notice from the SEC. They're launching a full investigation into your trading history. The firm has to suspend you pending the outcome. We need you to hand over your laptop and phone." Marcus's world tilted on its axis. He began to bluster, to threaten, to name-drop. The men were unmoved. He was escorted from the building, his belongings in a cardboard box, the whispers of his former colleagues following him down the hall. The cascade had begun. The initial disbelief of the Beaumont family quickly curdled into panic. Eleanor's calls to her bank manager, a man who had previously fawned over her, were now met with polite but firm stonewalling. Their lines of credit were frozen. Their investment portfolios were suddenly inaccessible. Clara, at her boutique, received a certified letter from the equity firm that had funded her expansion. It was a formal notice of default, citing a breach of covenant she didn't understand. Her suppliers, as if on cue, all began demanding cash on delivery. The river of money that had sustained her business had dried up overnight. They scrambled, trying to leverage their connections to call in favors, but every door they pushed on was locked. It was as if a silent, invisible wall had been erected around them. Their social circle, sensing a fall from grace, began to distance themselves. Invitations were rescinded, calls went unreturned. The final crushing blow came in the form of an eviction notice posted on the grand front door of their mansion. The shell corporation that held their mortgage had been acquired by a new entity, and that entity was demanding full and immediate repayment. They had 30 days to produce several $million or be out on the street. Their reaction was a predictable storm of rage, denial, and frantic blame. Eleanor was convinced it was the work of a social rival. Marcus was certain a business competitor was trying to ruin him. Clara, overwhelmed and terrified, simply wept. It never once occurred to any of them that the source of their ruin could be the quiet, unassuming man they had so callously thrown away. From his new temporary headquarters in Zurich, Liam watched it all unfold through the dry, factual reports provided by Mr. Davies. He read about the repossessed cars, the suspended club memberships, the public humiliation of Marcus's suspension being leaked to the financial press. He saw paparazzi photos of a haggard-looking Clara closing her boutique for the last time. He felt a strange detachment, as if watching a play for which he had written the script. The characters were behaving exactly as he expected. Their arrogance gave way to desperation, their confidence to terror. They were trapped in a maze of their own making, and the walls were closing in. He maintained his silence, a ghost pulling levers from halfway across the world. He instructed Davies to buy up all their debt from other creditors, consolidating his power. He became the sole entity to which they owed everything. He owned their past, their present, and their rapidly shrinking future. With their resources gone and their reputation in tatters, the Beaumonts were desperate. Their lawyers could do nothing. Every contract was legal. Every action taken against them was perfectly executed. Finally, left with no other option, they requested a meeting with the head of the mysterious conglomerate that had, in the space of a few weeks, systematically destroyed their lives. They wanted to beg, to plead for mercy. Mr. Davies informed Liam of the request. "They do not know who they are meeting," he said. "They only know it is the final authority." "Grant the meeting," Liam said, his voice calm. "Book a boardroom at the company's main office in New York. I'll fly in tomorrow." The time for observation was over. The time for the final confrontation had arrived. The boardroom was a cathedral of corporate power. It was on the top floor of a skyscraper in Manhattan, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a godlike view of the city below. The table was a single, massive slab of polished black granite, so long that a person at one end was a distant figure to a person at the other. Liam sat at the head of this table, dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored dark suit. He was not the same man who had stood, broken, at the airport. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable authority. He looked out at the sprawling city, a kingdom he now commanded, and felt a profound sense of stillness. He heard the door open. He did not turn. He listened to the soft, hesitant footsteps approach. He heard a gasp. "You," Eleanor whispered, her voice a mixture of shock and utter contempt. Liam turned his chair slowly. There they were. Eleanor, her face pale and drawn, her expensive clothes hanging on her as if on a scarecrow. Marcus, his usual arrogance replaced by a sullen, resentful glare. And Clara. She looked thin, lost, her eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly turning to horror. "What is this?" Marcus demanded, his voice trying for its old bravado, but cracking under the strain. "What are you doing here? Are you the janitor?" Liam did not rise. He simply gestured to the chairs opposite him. "Please, sit." They remained standing, frozen in disbelief. "I must say I'm surprised you managed to get an appointment," Liam said, his tone conversational, almost pleasant. "The new owner of this company is a very private man. He rarely meets with defaulting debtors." The words hung in the air, each one a slap in the face. "What are you talking about?" Eleanor snapped. "We are here to see the person in charge. Send him in. We do not have time for games." "There are no games," Liam said, his voice dropping, losing its pleasant edge and taking on a cold, hard weight. "You wanted to meet the man who owns the company that holds your mortgage, the man who owns the equity firm that funded the boutique, the man whose auditors uncovered your son's creative accounting." He let his gaze drift over each of them, lingering for a moment on Clara, who looked as if she was about to faint. "Well," he said, spreading his hands wide, "here I am." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so deep it felt loud, a roaring vacuum where their entire understanding of the world had just been obliterated. They stared at him, their faces a mask of comical, horrified disbelief. Clara was the first to speak, her voice a trembling whisper. "Liam, how?" "How?" Liam leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "You want to know how? It's a funny story, really. It starts with a man you all dismissed, a kind, quiet man you called poor, eccentric Uncle Arthur." He saw the flicker of recognition, of dawning comprehension in their eyes. "You spent years mocking him, ignoring him, treating him like an embarrassment," Liam continued, his voice resonating with cold power in the vast, silent room. "But what you didn't know, what your greed and arrogance blinded you to, was that Uncle Arthur owned everything, this building, this company, and 1,000 other things you couldn't possibly imagine. An empire worth $33 billion. Eleanor staggered back, clutching her chest, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. Marcus's face had turned a sickly shade of grey. "He saw you for what you were," Liam said, his gaze sweeping over them like a searchlight. "Shallow, cruel, and obsessed with the very thing he had in abundance but valued so little. And he saw me. He saw how you treated me, the man you considered to be nothing more than dirt beneath your designer shoes." He stood up, walking slowly around the edge of the table toward them. They flinched as he approached. "He left it all to me, Eleanor. Every penny, every share, every property, including the house you're being evicted from, the business you stole from me, the company your son used as his personal piggy bank." "It's not possible," Eleanor finally hissed, her voice venomous. "You're a liar, a thief. You stole it." "Stole it?" Liam laughed, a short, bitter sound devoid of humour. "No, I inherited it. The same way you hoped Clara would inherit a fortune from some suitor you approved of. The irony is quite something, isn't it?" He stopped in front of Marcus. "You're facing federal charges, Marcus. Fraud, embezzlement, years in prison. The evidence is overwhelming. I made sure of it." He then turned to Clara. She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "Liam, please," she begged. "I didn't know I was—" "They made me." "They made you?" Liam's voice was dangerously soft. "Did they make you stand there and watch as they threw money at my feet? Did they make you turn your back and walk away without a single word? You made your choice, Clara. You chose them. You chose this, their world of status and money." He walked back to the head of the table. "Well, welcome to the consequences." Clara fell to her knees. "I love you, Liam. I always have. We can fix this. Please, don't do this to us." Her plea was so pathetic, so transparently self-serving, that Liam felt nothing but a cold, final emptiness. The love he had felt for her was a fossil, the memory of something long dead. "The eviction from the house is final. The marshals will be there on Monday," he said, his voice like chipping ice. "The boutique and all its assets have been liquidated. As for Marcus, my lawyers will be cooperating fully with the prosecution. I suspect they will be asking for the maximum sentence." He looked at the three of them, broken and defeated on the plush carpet of his boardroom. He felt no pity. He felt no anger. He felt only closure. "You asked for a meeting to beg for mercy," he said. "I have nothing for you. You are owed nothing." He paused, looking directly at Eleanor. "Actually, that's not entirely true. I believe you gave me a severance package at the airport. A few $100s. Consider that your inheritance. It's all you have left." With that, he turned and walked toward a private door at the side of the room. He did not look back. He left them there, their world in ashes, to be dealt with by the security guards he had waiting just outside. The sound of Eleanor's hysterical screams and Clara's desperate sobs faded, as the heavy door clicked shut behind him. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The Beaumonts' downfall was complete and public. Marcus was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to a decade in a federal prison. Without a penny to her name or a friend in the world, Eleanor was forced to take a job as a cleaner in a downtown office building, the ultimate humiliation for a woman who once ruled society. Clara, shunned by everyone, disappeared, last heard of working as a waitress in a small-town diner hundreds of miles away, forever haunted by the life and the man she had so carelessly thrown away. Liam never saw them again. He had no desire to. His justice was delivered, the scales balanced. He did not, however, embrace the extravagant life he could have. Guided by the memory of Arthur Sterling's quiet wisdom, he understood that the $33 billion empire was not a prize to be enjoyed, but a responsibility to be wielded. He did not live in a penthouse or a mansion. He kept a modest, comfortable apartment in the city. He spent his days not on a yacht, but in the offices of the newly formed Sterling Foundation, an organization he created with the company's vast profits. Its mission was simple: to provide legal aid, educational grants, and business startup funds for immigrants and underprivileged individuals who possessed the same drive and integrity he had once had. He was not a flamboyant billionaire. He was a quiet philanthropist, his name rarely appearing in the press, his work done behind the scenes. He found a purpose that was more fulfilling than any amount of money or power, building ladders for others, the way Arthur had secretly built one for him. One afternoon, visiting the construction site of a new vocational training center his foundation was funding, he met the project's lead architect. Her name was Anna. She was brilliant, passionate, and had a kind smile that reached all the way to her eyes. She knew him only as Liam, a representative of the foundation. She was impressed not by his wealth, which she knew nothing of, but by his genuine interest in the project and his deep respect for the workers. They started talking first about blueprints and building materials, then about books, music, and dreams. He found in her the genuine partnership and shared values he had once thought he'd found in Clara. It was a new beginning, built not on a fairy tale, but on a foundation of mutual respect and quiet understanding. As he stood with Anna one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky over the rising frame of the new building, he thought back to that moment at the airport. He realized the Beaumonts, in their cruelty, had given him an unexpected gift. They had stripped him of everything, forcing him to find a strength he never knew he possessed. They had tried to break him, but had instead forged him into something stronger. True wealth, he now understood, was not measured in dollars or stock portfolios. It was measured in character, in resilience, and in the ability to turn profound injustice into a force for good. The Beaumonts had been rich in money, but bankrupt in spirit. In the end, that was a poverty from which there was no escape. His victory was not in their ruin, but in his own quiet, meaningful, and purpose-driven life.